Hey BattleTech friends, this is Trailblazer. I wanted to talk to you about armored vehicles today. Tracked tanks, wheeled tanks, and hover tanks. What are the distinctive weaknesses and strengths of these kinds of vehicles, and what are the battlefield roles that they are particularly well suited for, and what are the roles that they're no good at and that you shouldn't choose them for? Now obviously hovercraft have a particular advantage when it comes to speed. That goes without saying, and it means that they're an especially good reconnaissance vehicle. For me, I would never use a battle mech for reconnaissance when I could use a hovercraft or a VTOL, but beyond that special speed advantage of the hovercraft, what are the special things that armored vehicles in general bring to the table? Well, on the obvious side, armored vehicles are easily immobilized by motive system damage, especially if it comes in from the sides or rear of the tank. What this means is that you don't want to use an armored vehicle in a situation where they're going to be the primary force projector that is at the head of an advance, where you both want to keep moving and you want to keep firing. That is not the role that these units are best suited for. In the 30-25 period, you can sort of get away with assigning that function to a tank, but that's because the battle mechs of that period also had really significant disadvantages and flaws having to do with their low technology. And there were some vehicles of the period, such as the Manticore, that were extremely well designed to be used as battle line units. So in that period it was more doable. But starting in the 30-50s, you really don't want to use armor as the spearhead of an advance. You can use them for direct fire support if you would like, something like an Alicorn tank that can kind of rain down fury from a high position, but only if you're fighting on a map where there's a really excellent overlook location that can give the tank a clear field of fire anywhere on the battlefield, even if it stays put. In this kind of a situation, you're basically using the tank as a stationary turret without any kind of movement or maneuver capacity. But these points also connect to one of the distinctive strengths of armored vehicles, which is their low elevation. They only stand one level high, and so on a map with lots of level 1 hills or craters, it's really easy for them to hide behind terrain. So the ideal role for an armored vehicle is one where it's going to be hiding behind terrain and not shot at very much, stay out of line of sight of enemy forces. You can guess what I'm about to say. This means that the ideal role for an armored vehicle is indirect fire support with long-range missiles. Another distinctive disadvantage of tanks, once we get beyond the 30-25 period, is that they can never mount double heat sinks, only single heat sinks. This means that their heat capacity is always going to be considerably less than any battle mech of the same weight. Fortunately, they only gain heat from energy weapons. This means that the most efficient thing with an armored vehicle is to mount weapons on it that are not energy weapons, but that produce a fair amount of heat, because those weapons are kind of balanced for battle mechs that have heat sinks to compensate for them, and your vehicle won't need to have heat sinks for them. What this means is, again, it's highly beneficial to mount missiles on an armored vehicle, because missiles create considerable heat compared with most ballistic weapons like autocannons. Here's another advantage of tanks that you might not have thought of. On a tank, the probability of an ammunition explosion critical is fixed. It's not proportional to the amount of ammunition that you've stored on the tank. This means that carrying a large amount of ammunition on a vehicle is not a disadvantage in terms of its resilience, the way that it is for a battle mech. With a mech, if you mount tons and tons of ammo on it, it's going to go down more easily to enemy fire that might cause an ammunition explosion. But that's not true for tanks. Tanks have the same chance of ammunition explosion whether they're carrying 1 ton of ammo or 5 tons of ammo. What that means is that if you have a battlefield role where you are going to need a whole lot of ammunition, you might want to choose a tank. Again, this makes them ideal for long-range missile support, because if you're doing a lot of indirect LRM fire, you're likely to be using up a lot of ammo over the course of the game. The issue about heat sinks also means that the performance gap between vehicles and mechs is going to grow as the tonnage increases. A 35-ton tank is going to be much closer to the capabilities of a 35-ton mech than a 100-ton tank is to the capabilities of a 100-ton mech. So if you try to use vehicles on maps with a lot of craters and low hills, and if you try to focus on vehicles that are on the lighter side of the mass spectrum and vehicles that tend to mount long-range missiles as a primary weapon, you can't go very far wrong with those rules. On the other hand, if you tell me that your main battle line is going to be made up out of heavily armored tanks with lots of direct fire weaponry that you intend to take lots of direct fire damage, well, you pursue that tactic at your own risk.